Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guest. And I got to tell you something, people. When I lived in L.A., I would occasionally do background work. It was always fun, and I would always get a good meal, and I would always run into some actors on the set, and I would talk to them, and the background people would say, you can't talk to them, they're the actors. I'm like, shut up, I interviewed them. But my guest today, I was actually in a movie he directed right before I left Hollywood, and my guest is a director. He's a producer, a great writer, an actor, and my guest is Steven Brill. How you doing, Steven?
Hello. I didn't know about that. What movie was that?
I was background in Sandy Wexler, and what happened was, I still remember it was a big party scene. It was a big party scene in a house, and they shuttled us up. And I was sitting there, and as a director, you probably don't notice this as much, but as background, we would. There's always that asshole who tries to steal the scene. Like, they're always trying to jump in the camera. And I kept trying to get away from this guy who was trying to do it. So it was crazy. So I worked with you. That's crazy. Now I can put it on my IMDb credit because it seems like all background people are doing that now.
That's funny. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I don't remember you exactly, but that was probably the big house up in Bel Air, the Hadid house that we did the big party scene in. Yeah, there were a lot of people there.
It's how now as a director, how do you handle when it's such a big crowd? Because as you know, if you don't know, background actors, they don't do a background check. There's some weirdos, there's some normal people, and I know you have your PAs and other people running around. But as a director, has it ever gotten unruly for you, where you're like, these people are just out of control?
Yeah, I've had that experience several times. Particularly, there's a movie I did called Little Nicky, which was, do you know that movie?
Yeah.
Little Nicky, yeah. It was a 2-week shoot at a park in LA that was supposed to be Central Park, called the Arboretum out in Pasadena, and this was before what would now be done with CG or computer-generated people. We had to get 2,000 angry New Yorkers gathered in one park to recreate the end of the world scene at the end of Little Nicky, or the potential end of the world scene. So we had 2,000 extras at one point, paid extras. This is not like show up and sit in the stands. This was sort of acting. They were the crowd, and it was all nights too. So they would show up at 4:00 in the afternoon and leave at 6 in the morning. And it was 2 straight weeks of that. And let me just tell you something. That was unruly. That was because they were supposed to be unruly people, and it just became a party atmosphere, and it was dark, and they would disappear into the woods, and it felt like Apocalypse Now, the bridge scene in Apocalypse Now, only in real life, where it was like I didn't know who was in charge. Ostensibly it was me, but it was just crazy. And I actually got a Facebook from somebody who said, I remember the Arboretum 20 years ago. I was like, I don't. And it was a background person. It was like, that was the best 2 weeks of my life. We just partied in the woods. And I'm like, all right, that's good. So yeah, it's tough sometimes, but it's really, if you look at it, it's a lot. If you try to micromanage it, it's really hard to set the background yourself. So you have an AD team, assistant director team, and a bunch of people, but it's very complicated and hard. It takes a lot of getting used to.
Now, how did this career start? I know you were into playwriting and stuff like that in college, but were you a creative kid, or what was your path to wanting to create? And you've created so much.
Yeah, and I grew up in upstate New York till I was 11, and then we moved to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and that was in the 70s. And I didn't, maybe like some of the older people like myself, we didn't know that you could have a career in the arts or be a director or an actor. No one that I knew was an actor or a director, or it wasn't like a writer, a screenwriter. That was just something that happened in the movies. And so that idea to be creative, even though I knew what plays were because I went to New York as a kid and watched plays, and I loved that. So that was my first instinct, is to write for the theater. And that was something I started to do in high school. And then that sort of led out to just writing as a creative output and to be creative, because the idea of making movies wasn't really possible. I mean, you could have Super 8 movies, but it wasn't like a path as it would be today. So I wrote plays, bad plays. I acted in plays in high school. I loved theater, and then I wrote what would be creative writing, but journalism was sort of the umbrella of it, because I worked for the school paper and wrote a column of a humorous column, sort of like Art Buchwald inspired when I was a kid. And so that was a creative output about being a writer. And that sort of oriented me towards using writing as a creative path. And when I went to college, I went as a journalist because that's what I thought was a job. I'd seen All the President's Men, and I thought that was a real job, and that was creative, but also investigatory and interesting. And then when I got to college, to Boston University, I realized they have a film department, and you could also work with the theater department there while you're in the film department, and it was a major. And I'd always loved movies as an audience member, but I didn't really know you could study them and make them. And so then I switched in Boston to from journalism to filmmaking, or a communications major. And that was in conjunction with doing theater up there. That was what sort of set me on the creative path.
Now, when you were up in Boston, did you have any mentors, or what really got you kicking your feet and making you work harder?
Well, going to movies was really the most inspiring thing. They had these revival houses in Boston, the Coolidge Corner Revival House, the Nickelodeon, which were just, movies were everywhere. And this was in the early 80s. So you had all the replays from the movies from the 70s. And then I started studying film and had great film professors at school. And that was super inspiring. And then on the theater end, the writing end, I was studying playwriting and a playwright named Derek Walcott, sort of renowned Pulitzer Prize winning playwright, a poet, came in, and I knew right away who he was, and I signed up with him the first time he came in, and he'd come from Harvard, and I signed up with him, became part of his first class, and I stayed with him all 3 years that he was there, or that I was there with him, and he became a huge mentor, even though he was this. He was from St. Croix, and he was a Caribbean sort of naturalist poet and playwright. He knew the theater backwards and forwards and Shakespeare, and he taught and encouraged us to write plays. And he was sort of the connection to the theater acting part, writing part. And then my film professors over at the other department were the ones who inspired me, along with going to movies, which there's nothing better than going to movies.
Now, when you graduate, what are your plans? Do you want to act? Do you want to write? You're not sure. I mean, you're 22. I mean, it's something that, you have this idea, and once again, no one knows. I mean, so what was your goal when you graduated? What was your goal?
We had a lot of film. I had a crew, a film guys crew. We all did the same sort of thing, made movies, and I did more theater too. But and a lot of them were going to LA or New York. That was the choice. And the theater people went to New York, and the film people went to LA. And my mother happened to live in LA, and I thought I'd go there because I wasn't ready to hack it in New York theater. I knew that. I knew I was afraid to try to make it as a playwright in New York. It was just too expensive, and I chose to go to LA, where I started writing plays in LA, which was so silly. Because LA has a theater scene, it was like, why are you doing plays in LA?
I used to know a guy who would. Yeah. I knew a guy who would do plays in a place in North Hollywood called like Zombie Joe's Playhouse, and they're the most craziest plays. Yeah. But I mean, there was some some theater, but like everyone seemed trying to be avant-garde. It was always like it was just weird.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there was avant-garde, and then there was the thing if anyone would leave a play in a second if they got a guest star on 21 Jump Street. So it was very, it wasn't as committed as New York, obviously. And I sort of sorted that out, and then my love of film just sort of made me realize I should write screenplays. I'm in LA. I got a job to make money as a PA and an assistant for a movie director, and I said, I should write screenplays because here I am, and that's what I did. I just switched from writing spec plays or on my own. I started writing screenplays on my own while I had odd jobs.
So as you're doing this, when do you finally get a little bit of a break? What happens?
That's a good question. It's I'm very much about just generating your own work when you can. With writing, you can do it. Acting's a little harder. You can't just act and get better. But I just grinded on scripts alone in my apartment, my shitty apartment in Culver City, and I wrote a comedy spec that was pretty commercial and pretty funny, and that I had a friend from college, and are you asking these questions, like, is your audience interested in these stories, like, or you're interested in these stories, like how it gets done? Because I it's interesting, but the connection is through college. One of my friends started working for Gene Wilder as his development person or something, like a producer. Remember Gene Wilder, of course, and I wrote my script and I sent it to her, and she said, "Oh, this is good. I don't, maybe Gene will read it." But we have these agents that, submit us material, and you need an agent, and maybe I'll send your script to the agent, which is a smaller agent named Lucy Stilla, who is a great small agent. And she read my spec script, and she said, spec script means, no, it was just wrote down, no one was attached to it or no one bought it. And she read it and said, "I'll represent you based on the script." And so then that little break, then this smaller agency, not CAA or ICM or those places, she started pushing my script around to various producers for whatever reason. And one of the producers she sent it to was a guy named Bobby Newmeyer, who was a dear friend. He's passed away, but he was a hustler producer, and he had sort of set up a little company called Outlaw at Columbia Pictures, and he got Steven Soderbergh's script, Sex, Lies, and Videotape, on his own, and he was raising money and producing that. And so he bought my script on an option, the script I wrote called Meet Your Match, that got the agent, which was a commercial screenplay. And he optioned that, and he had a bungalow at Columbia, and he put up Soderbergh and me in the same office to rewrite our scripts for him. And so that's an interesting point, because he paid me like $2,500 or something, which was my first paid gig when I was a kid. And that was a huge break, and it set me on the path. And then he also was doing Soderbergh's movie, which, for trivia point, I'm in because I was hanging out with him, and he didn't know any funny actors that he could hire. So he said, "Do you want to be in my movie?" And I said, "Sure," because I had done some acting, and I was like, that'd be fun. And then I said, "Do you want to be in my movie?" Thinking my movie was going to be this big commercial comedy that would be a huge hit. And he said, "Sure." And his movie went on to get made next year, and I was in it, and it gave me a funny acting career, a fake acting career. And my movie never got made, but I stayed with that producer and developed more things. And then at the same time, I was writing The Mighty Ducks, a spec script, on my own. And I also wrote in that period a script with Mark Maron, the podcaster and actor, because we were roommates. So I just kept generating scripts that then when I got that break you talked about, I had Mighty Ducks. I think it already been written, and everything leads to something else pretty much.
Where did Mighty Ducks come from? I mean, were you a hockey fan? I mean, how did he come up?
Yeah, I was in upstate New York, in Utica, New York, which is where I grew up near, is kind of where, if you saw the movie Slapshot, that whole hockey league is based around where I grew up, and I went going to those hockey games, and I loved hockey, and I played hockey as a kid, a little kid, and I wasn't very good, and I played baseball as a kid, and I was on teams that never won, but I loved the sport, and I loved hockey. And then when we moved to Florida, I stopped playing hockey, concentrated more on baseball, but I always loved the experience of how great the feeling of skating and hockey was, and then but how bad I was at it was an interesting dilemma. And then when I moved to LA, I was rooming with another director named Peter Berg. We were friends from before, from high school actually, and he had a similar story where he was he had played hockey as a kid and given it up, and we were living in this apartment, me, Pete, Mark Maron, and we had nothing to do, and so Pete and I would go skating at a rink up the road. There was a skating rink during the day, you could have a public session. And we sort of taught ourselves to skate again and really got into hockey, started going to the Kings games before Gretzky even was there, because it was a way to kill time. And we really fell back in love with the sport, particularly me. And I saw these little kids at the rink doing their Pee Wee hockey, and it reminded me of when I did Pee Wee hockey. And also I was trying to think of another script to write on my own. And I think I had just seen The Bad News Bears again at that period of my life. And I thought that was one of the greatest movies ever. Even as a kid, when I saw it, it was so inappropriate, that movie, but I thought it was fantastic. And I saw it again, and I was like, man, how about Bad News Bears for hockey, using, my experience and my sort of love for the game and refound love. And so I wrote that in that apartment, when I was, I think, 26, right after I wrote the Meet Your Match script. I wrote that, or maybe I wrote the script with Mara, and then I wrote that, and just had it because I loved hockey, and it went in the shelf. And then, interestingly, all that script I had, when I signed with the agent, that agent got me, the job with Bobby. That agent got me a job, strangely, with a TV producer where I wrote on a TV show for a year. And because that was such a big deal, CAA came in and signed me as a TV writer. And when you're signed as a TV writer, they also give you a film guy who says, oh, they don't want you to do film because there's more money in TV. But I said I had this script called Mighty Ducks from 3 years ago or something. I think it was 2 or 3 years old by then. And CAA read it, and they sent it out just as a favor to me. And that got bought by Disney, and that's how that got going.
Once that movie became a big hit, did you start feeling a whole lot of juice in LA? Because they always say, you have a hit, something happens and things change. A lot of actors, they get a show and they think it's going to change their lives, and it doesn't. But once you get a hit like that, does your stock go up as a screenwriter, and is that what helped you parlay into directing?
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. I mean, I felt it more like a steady rise. It didn't feel like overnight, because I always equated that with just tons of money. And, there was a spec market where you could sell scripts for $2-3 million. Shane Black did that. And I was like, that would determine whether I was a hot writer, if I got paid tons of money. I got paid, the minimum for Ducks. And then the next deal, I got more than that, much more. I did Ducks too. And so it felt like a steady working man sort of rise. But definitely I was in the group and in the club and had a career. And then, interestingly, the directing thing, so Mighty Ducks was 91, but I wanted to direct. I knew I wanted to direct after that, after Ducks came out. And I remember my agent telling me, well, the best way to be a director and get a movie is to write a hit movie. And I was like, yeah, write a hit movie. That's easy, right? But that is ironically, or not ironically, what happened. I did write the hit movie, which gave me, in that genre of kids movies, I don't think I could have gone off and made something completely different. But that gave me the currency to say, hey, if I do a movie that might be successful like The Ducks, or like The Ducks, can I direct it? And Judd Apatow was a friend of mine, and he had a relationship with this company called Paravan, which was had a Disney deal, and it made perfect sense. So lo and behold, I was directing like 3 years after Mighty Ducks came out, or 2 years after Mighty Ducks came out.
Now, when you started directing, you directed heavyweights. Now, what's it like when you have to direct when you have to direct kids, and then you have some great talent in that? I mean, it's your first time helming behind the camera. Now, you've been on sets, I'm sure. Are you intimidated at all? I mean, what goes through your mind? And I guess with kids, it must be hard because you don't want to get them upset. I mean, what is that like when it's your debut and you got kids and stars and
kids are hard by nature, and particularly as they're going through growth spurts and stuff. But I felt I figured it all out by working on the sets of Mighty Ducks. Even though I didn't direct Mighty Ducks 1 or 2, I produced them. I was there for I was sort of the hockey go-to person on them, and so I got a lot of experience with what it's like to work with kids on skates, which is, think about kids not on skates, it's hard, but no. So I had a feeling, I had a sense of it. So it wasn't as overwhelming when I got to heavyweight, but I just developed a style with Judd, which was, just sort of doing do it again while they're on camera and try it again and do it again, and for comedy, but also just to keep the energy of all these crazy kids contained in a take was something I learned. So it is tough, and it's not easy to get the performances within the structure of time when it comes to kids. I think I'm pretty good at it, though, or I was. Yeah.
Now, after that, how did you meet Adam Sandler? Because you've had a long relationship with him. You've written and you've directed. How did that come to fruition?
Well, since this is the story, the origin story, it's interesting. I think I can plug in the Sandler equation back in the past. If those listening care to remember, I said that I was in the movie Sex Lies Videotape. That became a huge movie at Sundance, and even though I had a small role, everyone thought I was an actor of note from New York, and I was from New York. So when people asked me, "Where are you from?" I say New York, and they thought, "Oh, he's a New York actor, undiscovered in L.A." So I got an acting agent, and they sent me out for acting roles. And then if you see my IMDb, I did like all these roles with really cool directors like Mike Nichols and Tim Burton because I knew who they were, and I was like, "Holy shit! If I can just be in their movies, even one line, that would be awesome." And because they were sort of always looking for the new, quote, hot actors, or I was like smaller character actors, they gave me these roles in movies, and I started appearing in these really cool movies like Edward Scissorhands. And at that point, I had acting cred, and my roommate was still Pete Berg, who was an actor, and his career started pushing along, and then he got a call from his agent, I guess, saying there was a weird movie that was shooting on a boat in Mexico. It was going to be improvised, and does Pete want to be in it? And he said, yeah. And Pete and I were so close. We were always like looking out for each other. He said, "Do you want my roommate Pete Brill to do it?" He just did stuff like videotape, and the producers were like, "Yeah, so come on, we'll go on the boat, and we'll improvise the boat." So we go to this. We sign up and go to New Orleans to get on this boat and improvise a movie. And Adam Sandler is the star of this movie, and he's just been discovered in New York as a 18-year-old comedian or 20-year-old comedian, and he's the star of it. And we all meet. I meet him in New Orleans, and we get on the boat, and we do this horrible movie called, I think it's called Going Overboard now. I think that it was called Babes Ahoy back then, but now it's called Going Overboard, and it's a bad watch. It's not a good bad movie. It's kind of a bad movie, sadly, but it was improvised. There was no structure, no reason it should have been good. Adam, of course, you can see why he's great and what is going to be great about him, but the movie's kind of silly. But I'm in it for a second, and Pete's in it. Billy Zane is in it. There's also Billy Bob Thornton's first movie, I think, where he got a SAG card for saying one line. It's a funny movie if you look at it like that. And I met Adam there, and Adam and Alan Coburg, his friend and partner, I got friendly with him, and then he moved to LA after that movie, before SNL, and I was working on that TV show, I said, and we became friends, and I tried to help him out, but we just hung out more and became friends with him. Judd Apatow I met at that period, and sort of when I was the one who was actually working and getting stuff done, and they were just sort of trying to figure it out. We were all buddies and friends, and then they got their things, and we stayed together, working together, and it's always a dream after Heavyweights, like, oh man, Adam's got this career going that he got going on his own completely through SNL work and other stuff, and then finally, around Big Daddy, I was free, and he was free, and I came on and worked on that. Or a Wedding Singer. I think I was in Wedding Singer before as an actor, a funny thing. I don't think I worked on Wedding Singer as a writer, but I worked on Big Daddy with him as a writer, and that started that run from Big Daddy, and then I wrote and directed Little Nicky after that, and Mr. Deeds. Took a couple years off and came back in the last decade and did a bunch of stuff with him.
What's it like when you direct a friend? I mean, it's a guy you were hanging out with, and now it's at a point where you guys are good friends. You're both very successful. Is it? Do you go back to that old feeling of like when you're hanging, let's say on Sunset, or do you sit there and go, okay, this is a business now?
That's a good question. I mean, movies are work for sure. There's schedules, there's pressure, but you're supposed to be being funny and having fun, doing these comedies. So Adam was super professional and smart about finding that balance of, I think by virtue of having his friends work with him, that was enough. We didn't necessarily have to be like having, we didn't have to be cracking each other up all the time because it was work. But it was very comforting and fun to work with your friends. And I always, had I not worked with Adam or not, I knew immediately. I just would always recognize Adam as a major star, to my credit. Like even in that Shecky movie, it was called The Unthinkable Shecky Moscow. That's what the original title was. That first movie, I was like, this kid's a star. And I saw his stand-up. I used to go to his stand-up. And I was like, this guy is the best I've ever seen. And I just was in awe of him as an actor, as a performer and his mind. And so to me, it was just really fun to engage with him. It wasn't like, I was sort of like really excited to work with his talent and help refine it and define it. And I think he was like really happy to make these movies too and have a good time. But definitely he's very work oriented, as am I. It's like, it ain't no quick movies. Like, it's more work, and we didn't have families back then, so it was a 24-hour day grind, a happy grind. But making movies is a grind.
So you direct him in those two movies, and you're getting directing career going. Now, when you start directing other people, that first movie after you directed Adam 2 in a row, is it sort of different because it's not Adam? I mean, I know you're a professional, but it's got to be like when you're used. I'm sure you had certain clues or looks you could give Adam because you guys just knew each other so well. But when you do the movie after the 2 with Adam, what was it like coming on set? Because you're like, it's like when a shortstop loses a second baseman. The first time they do a double play, so what was it like?
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a good question, a good point. It's funny because all my habits were deeply. I mean, I did heavyweights and Duck. That was my own thing, and then I did a little indie movie that was personal called Late Last Night with Emilio, and that was just sort of something I knew how to execute. And then the Adam movies, and then I did a movie called Without a Paddle, I think was the one after that, and that would be the one where I didn't have Adam, and it was a comedy, and it was supposed to, be like not an Adam movie, but be like a movie that would appeal to that same crowd. And so working with him was fun. It's funny because a lot of that shorthand, a lot of that, I could direct him, and with Adam, I could be like, I don't know about his face, and he'd be like, let me try it again. And that's not really the way you want to talk to actors you haven't worked with a lot. Like, I don't know. You want to be like, that was great. Try this, or let's do it again. And so there, I couldn't have that shorthand. It was Dax Shepard's first movie, that movie, and who I loved working with him. But a lot of my language, I had to get back to a sort of more formal. How to work with the actors, sort of how to get the best performance out of comedy, how to get the jokes. It's always hard. That's really what you're going for, is to get the comedy on screen, not being forced, not being hacky, and there are many paths to that waterfall. So I had to figure out a few without Adam because he so naturally has his own thing. But it worked out. I like that movie.
Well, you also, around that time, you stopped writing for a while. Was it because you wanted to concentrate on directing, or is it because you just didn't feel like writing, or was it because you were overwhelmed? I know directing a movie is a lot of work. People don't know that when everyone else goes home, you guys are sitting there in the editing room, you're looking at this, you're looking at that. There's all people don't get that. But was it just something that it was too hard at that point, or you just wanted to just completely direct?
I didn't have the time. Because it really took me 3-4 months to just sit there and do nothing else to generate a script. I had done a script. I generated a script for that friend Bobby Newmeyer back during all that. I took a movie that got made called Ready to Rumble. I mean, it got rewritten, but that was my original script that I had done. I think that was the last script that I wrote, a comedy script all by myself that got made. But then, when you're doing Without a Paddle as director, the thing is, the directors or I wrote on all the movies I did to certain degrees. Sometimes I wrote a lot, sometimes I didn't. I didn't get credit because the Guild, I think, properly says, you can't just rewrite as a director and get credit unless you rewrite almost all of it or more than half of it. And I certainly never rewrote more than half of Without a Paddle or Drillbit Taylor or Mr. Deeds. I actually wrote a lot of Mr. Deeds, so I could add credit on that, but it wasn't. We determined not to, just because I was like, I'll just be the director. So I kept writing on these scripts, but I didn't sit down and write on my own until I Walk of Shame, maybe like 10 years later. I wrote a script that got made. I think I wrote some other scripts, TV scripts and stuff that didn't get made, but I didn't write another script that got made by myself until 2010.
Well, when you did Walk of Shame, did you walk in and say, hey, okay, I wrote the script, I'm going to direct it too? Or did they just know you were attached as a director? How does that work? Because, you've had a career in both. So how did you deal with the studio?
Well, that wasn't a studio. Well, it was a studio. It was called Lakeshore, which is a mini major independent studio. They had their own money. A guy named Tom Rosenberg, who was a friend. I'd been friends with him for a long time, and I'd always talked about figuring out a movie that they could do or I could do with them. And we just never found the right idea. And then I had this idea, the Walk of Shame idea. I generally don't pitch movies and sell them that way. I have before, but this was something that I said, I think this would be really funny, this idea of a woman trying to get home after a night and everything that could happen to her based on movies I love, like Out of Towners or Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I just love those kind of movies. And Tom got it immediately and said I'd make that movie. And I don't think I'd even written the script. So I did write the script on spec. No one paid me to write that script. I wrote it thinking, if I nail this guy, Tom will probably give me the money to make it. And that's what happened.
What is that like, though, when you're writing a script on spec, when you've already sold scripts? I mean, does it get a little frustrating when you should just sit there and think, well, I have a successful track record. All my movies have made money. They should just dummy up and give me cash. I mean, does as a writer and as just a person, how do you deal with that?
Well, I didn't go out until I didn't ask for cash with that idea. I sort of chose to. I could have gone out and pitched it as an idea, and maybe sold it and then fought to direct it. Because they could have said, "Well, it's our idea, and now you wrote the script." But so this was a way to control it. I didn't feel it was a bad move because I knew if I executed the script, I could get it made and on my terms. So it wasn't. It was sort of a deliberate choice, and it felt like the right thing to do to just control it, not get paid later. Big spec means gambling on yourself a lot of the times, and I've always liked that proposition. I'll always sort of take back end. If you let me make the movie, you can pay me in success. It's a lot of how I've gone about things, for better or worse.
You said now you made it on your terms. Was there projects that weren't on your terms that frustrated you when you were earlier in your career?
Well, like that movie Ready to Rumble, I wrote that, and even though my friend was the producer, I didn't really control how it was rewritten or who rewrote it or how it got made. But that's sort of, you have to give that up. I mean, it's not frustrating, it's just sort of the way it goes. It's not my preferred way to work, which is why I haven't been a writer for hire, essentially, that much, because you don't control it, and it's really, when you're a writer for hire, it's not like, they read your script and say, great, they make you rewrite it, and it's a lot of work. And to me, that wasn't as satisfying being a writer for other people. And other frustrating experiences, no, I mean, Adam was such a advocate for anything I would do with him or anything I would do on my own. So he was very powerful and could always help me get what I wanted or collaborate to get what I wanted. So nothing was frustrating about any of those. And when I worked with Judd, another super big producer that just protects you from having to do or take notes you don't want to take from the studio or go in directions that you don't feel are right. So, and then when I do stuff myself, like Walk of Shame, that was pretty much everything I wanted to do with some obvious, collaboration with the producers. And then all the other Adam Sandler movies were like that, and now I'm working in TV now, doing the Mighty Ducks TV show, which is that definitely has a lot of input from the studio and the network and Disney, and that's not as that's just sort of like something that you have to expect and deal with, but it's not like purely creative endeavor. It's more like making product.
Well, how did the Mighty Ducks end up becoming a hockey team? What's the whole thing with Anaheim and you? Was there any relationship? I mean, how did it all happen?
That well, Disney. You know, my father was head of Disney, and he liked hockey for his kids, and I think that's why he initially wanted to get the movie going. And I think in the back of his mind, he wanted to buy a team for Anaheim. He was the head of Disney for Disney, and so when the movie became big enough, it wasn't Jaws. Like, it was a solid hit when it came out, and Eisner said, "I want to buy this hockey team. I think to have a second hockey team." Anaheim's great, and then saw the synergy idea of like, what if we actually call it the Mighty Ducks? And it was sort of this idea of company synergy, which was great, good for him. And so he made that happen by taking the property and assigning it to another Disney property, which was in most regards pretty damn cool to have happen. In other regards, it was pretty whiplashy. Like, what? You're taking the thing I created and doing that? I don't have rights. I sold my rights to Disney, but I do have say, and I do have like some rights. So I was like, okay. But it was all positive because they made the Mighty Ducks 2 right away, based on the idea that team was going to happen. And we made more movies, and it just became what it became.
It has to be cool, though. It has to be so cool to sit there. I'm a hockey fan. I'm a Flyers fan, and they've sucked this year. Yeah. But it must be cool as a hockey fan and growing up being a kid that a hockey team is named after something you created. I mean, that's like you go to a party, you go to a bar in Philadelphia and go, hey, the Mighty Ducks, yeah, that's me. Everyone would buy you a drink. They'd be like, holy shit, this guy, it's the Mighty Ducks.
Yeah, the Flyers.
No, Flyers fans would love that.
Buy me a drink.
Yeah, we would.
Okay, yeah, that's true. Yes, that is something I never forget. How it's so odd, though. It's almost unprecedented. I can't think of another thing that happened like that. Particularly since I was a hockey fan like you growing up, I liked the original team: Boston, Rangers, Montreal, Toronto, and I was a Buffalo fan too. But so I loved it. And then I remember looking at the newspapers when this happened 20 years ago, looking at the box scores for the NHL scores, seeing Ducks 3-2 over the Blues, and I'm like, wow, that is strange. Mighty Ducks. It was called the Mighty Ducks for years and years. Now it's called the Ducks. But when it said the Mighty Ducks, I was like, wow, that is awesome. I don't know what to do with it other than go, that is awesome. I should have been getting free beers in the bars more, but yeah, it's pretty cool. It's definitely, people use the word surreal a lot, but that is a surreal experience.
Now, how did you end up back with Adam? Because I said you directed me. I could say, hey, he directed me on Sandy Wexler. But how did you end up How did you end up getting back with Adam? Was it something that you just missed each other, or he said I have this Netflix deal, or how did that come about?
Yeah, the Netflix deal was his new project, and I had just done Walk of Shame. It's funny because sometimes I do studio movies and then I did this movie late last night I told you about after I did Heavyweights or something, and that was just for me to try to get a movie made on my right. I direct, I take all responsibility for it, and I remember Adam always like being impressed that I would do it, and I did it again with Walk of Shame, which even though that was kind of a commercial movie, I had stepped away from studios and generated this thing by myself, and Adam had just signed the Netflix deal, had done the first one, the Western one, and I had just done Walk of Shame, and it felt like he looked at Walk of Shame again, and I think that made him think, oh yeah, just like it before when I did the Linky to this other movie. He's like, oh yeah, maybe we should work together on one of these movies, and sort of that's what happened. It was just good timing, and our careers sort of, funny enough, circled back to each other. So I did this movie then did I do the next one we did? I think was that Sandy Wexler. After the Netflix deal, it was Sandy Wexler, that one, and then my favorite one in the middle was the special 100% Fresh that we did after Sandy Wexler, and that was a joy because I expressed how much I had heard at that point. 25 years, been a fan of his stand-up. I've been going to his shows. I've been just a fan and a supporter. And now to be able to work on 100% Fresh, which was this huge tour that we did, that I got to film all of it, cultivate it all, that was the best part. That was a great circle back on our relationship.
How do you direct? I used to do stand-up in the late 80s and early 90s, and when you're on stage, you're in your own world. But how, as a director, you're not directing a stage performance, are you? I mean, how does that work? Because I'm sure, Adam's just Adam. He's a great stand-up. But are you directing? Because he has the instinct. He knows what the delivery, because he's been doing it for years.
Yeah.
What's your input in directing during a stand-up?
Well, it can be different. In that show, it was capturing, getting the right. It's like a capture thing. You got this beautiful thing that you need to capture in the best way, in the best light. I mean, as far as I'm not, the material and stuff we would go over about set lists and stuff, but he has his act and he has his instincts that are usually always right. But I have input on that stuff and input on, how to maybe if we should push jokes harder or less hard, or so structuring that and everything. But other than that, it's about getting the right mood, getting the right look, getting the right tone, the right camera angles, and then editing it, which is a huge part of what makes that special good, because it was, a combination of 40 shows edited together to give you this one cohesive point of view. I just did a special for Netflix with a comedian named Catherine Cohen, which is out now, called The Twist She's Gorgeous, which is capturing this great cabaret act that she had, but really adding as much as I could as a director to it, visually, and also supporting the act and working on the material with her to the extent that I was helpful.
Now, when you did the Adam Sandler show, one of the performances was in Newark, right? Do you remember?
Yeah.
Yeah, a friend of mine.
A couple of them, yeah.
A friend of mine did video assist on that movie. His name is Lance Velasquez. And I remember he messaged me. He's like, "Yeah, I'm in Newark. I went to get a bottle of wine." And everyone's like, "Get back in the hotel room. You shouldn't be walking around late at night." But it was just funny because I remember when you were shooting that he was like, "Oh, I'm working on the Sandler thing," and he did a bunch of stuff with you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Newark, that neighborhood's not so bad. I mean, we all have this knee-jerk like Newark, but that downtown area where the art center is pretty good. But yeah, it was fun. That was the last performance of the tour, and a lot of the Newark shows are in the special for sure. But
now, tell me about Hubie Halloween. People love that movie. People love, and I think it's because it's a holiday movie. I mean, do you like tackling a movie that people mostly are going to watch around October and November, September?
Yeah.
I mean, what is that like for you when you sit there and go, well, people aren't going to be watching it all year, but I mean, what is it? Do you just give it your all anyway and say, I want to make this special for that time? Because Halloween's so special to kids and I mean, it's just a special holiday.
I mean, that was smart of Adam to make a seasonal movie. Like, I think we talked about always. Oh, he did like some other movie that is a guaranteed seasonal movie. Can't remember, but yeah, a Halloween movie. He's always wanted to do one specifically for that reason, that would be showed or watched or hopefully loved every that time of year. And so that was definitely a part of making that movie. But also, he wanted to play this character that he had been developing for years, called Canteen Boy from SNL. And he said versions or sort of feelings of that character, but there was some sort of attitude from that guy that he really wanted to play as a broader character, which is what this movie is, the broader character, like Sandy is. Do-Over's not, but obviously Sandler does the broader characters sometimes, and then he does the straighter performances. And this week just wanted to do a broad, crazy, slightly different, spookier Halloween-based version of this Canteen Boy guy.
So, what's next for you? I know the Mighty Ducks. What brought you back to that? Because you're writing more. I mean, you stopped writing for a long time. Now, do you miss writing?
I do. I mean, it's hard. I do. I've written some things that I'm going to try or try to get made. I wrote my version. I wrote a Huckleberry Finn adaptation that I'm pretty happy with. So that was something I worked on a few years ago that I really liked, just myself on spec, adapting that book to a contemporary setting. And I wrote some TV stuff. But yeah, I want to get back to writing. And I'm probably Mighty Ducks season 2. I wrote a few of those, but I'm gonna move away and make a movie. I think in the next month, this summer. Right now we're in. Do your podcast come out weekly? Is this coming out like?
This will come out in like this will come out in like 2 weeks.
Okay, so yeah, we're in late March now or mid March, and I'm finishing up Mighty Ducks Mighty Ducks season 2 of the TV show, and I'm going to hopefully start a movie that I didn't write, but I'm going to help rewrite this summer. So that's probably what I'll do, and then I might circle back to Adam, which is just the way things tend to go. I'd love to get back and work with him because he's got a few movies lined up for the next year or so, and maybe I can circle back with him in a couple of years, or I should write. I should just, and I might. And you're inspiring me to sit down and just generate a new script for myself that I can do.
Well, why don't you write a script that you can act? Because you act. You're an actor. You're a New York actor.
Yeah,
why don't you write a script you can act and be in?
I should. I would never cast myself. It's the problem. I usually look and go, I don't know. I could give myself a small role, but I'm not going to give myself a lead role. I would rather. I think there's better actors, but I can nail a small role, so I should definitely write myself a bigger, smaller role. Yeah, I'd like to do that.
Exactly. Well, hey, man, I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me. You've done some great work.
Got it.
And, and people look up Steven Brill. Definitely look him up. Go watch all his movies. Watch his movies. Go watch all that movies. Ones he's written, ones he's directed. Even go look Sex, Lies, and Videotapes. You can see him in that. And people, go to my website.
Yeah.
Go to my website, coopertalk.net. You can find over 900 episodes. Email me, Cooper, at coopertalk.net. My Instagram's at coopertalk1. Twitter's at coopertalk. Remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guest. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you guys next time.